Hello there, my name is Kain and welcome to the channel. Let me already give you a disclaimer, this video will not contain any fancy in-game gameplay to distract you from what I'm saying. I need you to listen, and I need you to listen good, because this video will be one of the most important videos that you'll ever watch when it comes to climbing in League of Legends. What I'm about to say will be applicable for every champion and every role, but from my experience, Vladimir players tend to struggle by far the most with the concept I'm about to explain. Now I know that their attention span tends to be ridiculously low nowadays, so I'll make this video as short as possible. To my knowledge, every League of Legends player has felt at some point during their climb that they need to 1v9 to win games, or even when they do 1v9, it's still very hard to get that juicy LP. Now I'm here to tell you that feeling like you need to 1v9 is the main factor why most people can't climb, specifically on Vladimir. Because if you feel like you need to 1v9, that's most likely because you just experienced one or even multiple games in which you thought you played amazing, but your teammates were playing really bad. So automatically you start feeling that even though you played well, it wasn't enough, and you need to start doing even more, which is the worst thing you could ever do. Now I'm going to show you why feeling like you need to 1v9 is extremely bad, and I'm also going to give you the solution that will fix all of your problems. Alright, so basically 2 days ago I coached this Diamond Vladimir player, and this clip is going to show you exactly why it's bad to feel like you need to 1v9, where it stems from that feeling and how you can solve it. So first of all, a little bit of context. This Vladimir and his team were winning for the majority of this game. Ultimately this game lasted for like 40 minutes, the enemy team came back, Vladimir's teammates made a lot of mistakes, they overextended, died many times, and he became quite tilted. The enemy team had a Rammus who was really doing his job really good. Like the Rammus always found engages onto the Vladimir's team backline, making them basically like soaking all the pressure, making it so easy for his team to win those fights. And Vladimir felt like, since his team struggled so much with Rammus, that he had to solve the problem of Rammus. He had to prevent Rammus from engaging, or when he engages, he needs to kill him. But Vladimir is typically not that good at shredding tanks. So in the majority of her games, it depends on the game, but in the majority of her games, you will not look to put even more pressure onto the Rammus, because that's what Rammus wants. He wants to soak as much pressure as possible, preferably from the high value targets in this game, from the Vladimir, from the Samira. If he can do that, he is successfully executing his game plan. But Vladimir said, we are losing, like I'm playing really good, but it's not enough. I need to 1v9 this game. I need to solve every single problem. I need to play for 5 people. I need to start doing stuff that typically I don't want to do as Vladimir. So it's very easy, and it's a really slippery slope to start trying to solve every single problem in the team rather than to focus on your own game plan and executing that as good as possible. Because Vladimir is very clearly here. He said, my team had a Rammus problem. We couldn't really deal with the Rammus, and I felt like I had to compensate for that and try to deal with him, attack him, look to kill him, zone him. But that's ultimately not what you want to do. The enemy team should say, we have a Vladimir problem. The enemy mid laner, support, ADC, just a high value target should have the feeling that the second they walk up, the enemy Vladimir blows them up. But that wasn't the case. Rammus executed his game plan really well, and Vladimir got baited by the Rammus executing his game plan really well, and he played into his cards by also trying to attack him, focusing him, and not trying to kill the backline of the Rammus' team. And this is the problem when you always feel like you need to 1v9. That typically doesn't stem from the fact that you actually have to 1v9. It stems from the fact that you're not doing what you need to do. Carrying games does not require you to 1v9. It requires you to do your job really well. For Vladimir, I do not care, because most people will feel like if they play on Vladimir really good, it will look something like this. They solo kill their lane opponent 2-3 times, they outfarm their lane opponent, they outroam their lane opponent, but who cares? Yes, this is ultimately going to make it easier to carry the game. What if you outfarm your lane opponent? What if you kill your lane opponent like solo kills? What if you outroam your lane opponent? What if you do all of that, but then once your champion needs to pop off, you typically skill for those big AoE team fights like Dragon fights and Baron. But what if you don't pop off in those fights? What if you're not even there? Or what if you completely mis-execute it? In that case, it doesn't really matter what you did before. Yes, you got the solo kills, but that's not what you need to do to win games. You need to win team fights. That is what your champion identity is. You scale for big AoE team fights, look to flank the high value targets in the enemy team, and just blow them up, securing the Baron or Dragon, and slowly but surely getting to that enemy nexus through those big wins in those fights. Whether you out-CS your opponent, whether you outroam them, that doesn't really matter, right? It does matter if you're already really good at doing what you need to do. then in that case, it's only going to make it easier to do what you need to do. But you shouldn't lose yourself in thinking, hey, I played really well, when you didn't even do your core fundamentals, when you weren't playing good, you didn't use the good combos, you didn't do the correct, for example, target selection in the fights, like maybe you ulted the Ornn instead of the enemy ADC. If you don't fulfill your job as your champion, then you don't deserve to win. And it's very hard to find games in which you performed your job as a champion perfectly. And if that's not the case, then you shouldn't be able to blame your team. If you didn't play perfectly, which is gonna be the majority of your games, most of all of them, then you shouldn't blame others. It's very easy to see your teammates make mistakes, blame them, and then try to solve their problems. No, instead of trying to solve their problems, you should look to execute your game plan better. The enemy team should have a VLADIMIR problem. Even though your team has a Rammus problem, the enemy team should have a VLADIMIR problem. You should not look to solve the problem. Now, if you play it out here, you're gonna see the Rammus engage in just a bit here. So here's the Rammus. Boom. VLADIMIR's initial response is looking to engage on this Rammus, walking away. And this is where I told the VLADIMIR, zone, zone, zone. You need to look to zone these people, ult them. Yes, Rammus is right now hitting your backline, but there's no way you're gonna one-tap this guy. You're gonna have to use everything in your kit. That's what Rammus wants. He wants you to hit him. He wants to soak your pressure so that you're not killing his team. Instead, I told him, look at this choke point that you currently have. The enemies have to walk through that. Look to blow them up. Look to ult EW. Now, ultimately, he did hit his ult, but he was a bit too late. He was too tunnel vision on the Rammus, and he wasn't able to do ult EW, which is obviously the combo to blow everybody up. So, to focus on the Rammus. Even though I let him know what he had to do here, because initially he was to focus on the Rammus, he couldn't do it anymore, the correct play. But if I didn't tell him at all, he would have just focused the Rammus, and there would have been 0% chance of winning this fight, right? And that is exactly why I believe people lose an insane amount of games on VLADIMIR, because as VLADIMIR, a lot of times you're side laning and you don't have that much impact, and then suddenly they feel like they need to overcompensate. They feel like, oh, my team struggles a little bit, I'm gonna try to solve everything here. That's not your job. You need to be very disciplined and execute your game plan to the best of your ability, and not trying to play for 5 people, not trying to solve all the problems that you have as your team. Like, just fulfill your own game plan. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be flexible. Solo queue is very chaotic and you sometimes need to be flexible, but in general, in the majority of the game, you're gonna have to do this straightforward game plan that you're meant to do, because there's a reason why we call it fundamentals. VLADIMIR has a certain way of playing that you need to do in the majority of your games if you want to consistently pop off with this champion, if you want to consistently climb. That is his fundamental game plan. Yes, you can be flexible with it, but in the majority of your games, you're gonna have to lean somewhat towards that fundamental game plan. And that is what a lot of VLADIMIR players, they forget, what a lot of people in general actually forget. But on VLADIMIR, it's so much easier because you need so much discipline throughout the entire game to side lane and to not really care about these teams, about like skirmishes and stuff like that, that by the time that they can finally fight, they feel like they need to do everything. They feel like they owe it to their team because they were side laning for so long that they need to do everything. That is definitely not the case. You need to be really good at what your champion needs to do. Instead of dealing with the Rammus problem, create a VLADIMIR problem for the enemy team. I hope that's clear. Alright, so I hope the example was clear. If not, you can ask me questions in the comments down below. So to summarize all this, feeling like you need to 1v9 actually baits you into trying to play as 5 players all by yourself and wanting to solve and do everything by yourself. Meaning that you're playing into the enemy cards and you're not acting on your own game plan. That's also the reason why a lot of people don't have the discipline to main one champion or even one role. In the beginning of maining a champion or role, you don't know what the most optimal game plan for your champion is, and even if you do know it, you're not going to be able to execute that game plan that well. Therefore, you think that you play well in the sense that you can maybe outfarm your opponents, outroam them, etc. But if your main task is to carry team fights, then all of the previous things don't matter as much as long as you don't do your job correctly in those team fights. So you start feeling like you play really well, even though you're not even sticking to the core fundamentals of your champion or role for that matter. And that makes you think that your champion or role is too weak and you just constantly switch between champions and roles. Or you constantly switch between game plans when playing the same champion, which also keeps you stuck in a certain rank. Instead, do research on your champion's identity and strive to become one of the best players to execute that game plan as good as possible. If you're looking for VLADIMIR's champion identity, I have an entire playlist with VLADIMIR guides, and you'll definitely find what you need in all of those guides.